The glass door of Billy's Burger swung open with such force that the bell above nearly tore from its mountainside. Caitlin Clark sat in her black SUV parked in a distant corner of the lot finishing up a phone call with her business manager. She had planned on grabbing a quick meal before heading to her next event, but the sudden commotion outside the restaurant caught her attention. Through the tinted windows, she saw two young employees in their crisp uniforms half-drag, half-push an elderly man toward the exit while another held the door open. The man's worn Vietnam veteran cap tumbled from his head, landing at the feet of stunned onlookers in the packed dining room. Caitlin's grip on her phone tightened. "Let me call you back," she said, quietly ending the call as she watched the scene unfold next to her. Mia, seated in the passenger seat, glanced up from her schoolwork. "Dad, what's wrong?" Instead of answering, Caitlin just nodded toward the restaurant, her expression darkening. "Sir, we've told you 3 times now, no shoes, no shirt, no service, and frankly, or close." The shift manager's cold voice carried across the parking lot as he gestured dismissively at the elderly man's worn military jacket, its patches faded, but still displaying his service insignia. The fluorescent lights from inside the restaurant cast harsh shadows on the manager's young face, highlighting a sneer that made Caitlin's jaw clench. James, her Harrison 72, struggled to maintain his balance as his weathered combat boots scuffed against the tile floor. His arthritic fingers gripped a wooden cane, knuckles white with effort. The cane itself told a story, decorated with unit insignias bearing the scratches and marks of 15 years of faithful service, much like its owner. "Please," James pleaded, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "I have money. I've been coming here every Tuesday for 15 years. Miss Jenny used to. Miss Jenny doesn't work here anymore." The shift manager cut him off, running a hand through his carefully styled hair. "And our new policy is clear about appropriate attire. This is a family establishment." The manager named tag read Bradley, newly minted, just like the corporate policies he wielded like a weapon through the restaurant's large windows. Caitlin saw how the casual diners had begun to slow their pace, phones appearing in their hands. As the scene unfolded, families shifted uncomfortably in their booths, some averting their eyes while others watched in growing indignation. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at the veteran's medal still pinned to his jacket. "Mom, those are like Grandpa's." The boy's voice carried through the now open door. The fluorescent lights caught the tears now freely falling down James's weathered cheeks as he was steered toward the exit. His cane clattered against the floor with each unsteady step. The evening air hit him like a physical blow as he was dumped outside the restaurant. James stumbled onto the sidewalk, his dignity scattered like the contents of his wallet, which had fallen open during the confrontation. Photos of long-lost brothers and arms spilled across the concrete, along with a carefully folded receipt for an American flag, the kind given at military funerals. James Harrison's story was one of quiet sacrifice and resilience. After 3 tours in Vietnam, he returned home to build a life centered around service to others. Every Tuesday for the past 15 years, he had come to Billy's Burgers after visiting the VA hospital, where he volunteered, counseling younger veterans. His military jacket and veteran cap weren't just clothes, they were symbols of brotherhood worn with pride during these weekly rituals. But everything changed when Fast Food Continental bought the local franchise 3 months ago. New management brought new policies, new faces, and a different attitude toward the community that had supported the restaurant for decades. The familiar warmth of Billy Burgers had been replaced by corporate efficiency and strict dress codes designed to elevate the dining experience. Gone were the photos of local sports teams that once lined the walls, replaced by generic corporate artwork. Gone was the special veterans discount on Tuesdays, deemed unnecessary in today's market. James hadn't even made it to the counter this time. The moment he stepped through the door, leaning heavily on his cane after a long day at the VA, the new staff had surrounded him, his military jacket worn but clean, adorned with medals and patches telling the story of his service, was deemed inappropriate attire by employees young enough to be his grandchildren. The purple heart pinned to his lapel, earned in a firefight that still haunted his dreams, meant nothing to them. The combat infantryman badge, tarnished but proud, was just another piece of metal that didn't meet the new dress code. As he knelt outside the restaurant, trying to gather his scattered belongings with trembling hands, he didn't immediately notice the imposing figure emerging from the black SUV. He didn't see the teenage girl quickly lowering her phone as she recognized what was happening. He didn't see the way other patrons in the parking lot stopped to stare as Caitlin Clark's tall, athletic frame unfolded from the driver's seat. Caitlin's expression darkened as she watched the elderly veteran struggle to maintain his Composure. Having lost her own grandfather, a former serviceman, the sight struck a deeply personal chord. Her grandfather had taught her that respect wasn't something you earned by following rules, it was something you gave freely to those who had sacrificed for others. Stay here, baby girl, Caitlin said quietly, but Mia was already raising her phone, knowing from experience that what was about to happen deserved to be documented. And inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was shifting. The same staff members who had been so quick to enforce their dress code now looked uneasy. Some of them suddenly found themselves busy wiping already spotless counters. Caitlin ducked through the entrance, her presence filling the space in a way that had nothing to do with her height. She carefully picked up the veteran's cap, noting the unit insignia, before stepping back outside. The shift manager's dismissive expression froze as he recognized Caitlin. Color drained from his face as he realized who had witnessed his earlier behavior. Sir, Caitlin said, her deep but gentle voice cutting through the tension. James looked up, recognition flickering across his features. Miss Clark, he began, trying to straighten his posture despite his trembling hands. I'm sorry you had to see. No, Caitlin interrupted softly. You have nothing to apologize for. She took a deep breath before continuing, her voice steady and firm. Would you mind if I heard your story? She gestured toward a nearby bench, offering the veteran a moment to collect himself with dignity. As evening traffic flowed past and curious onlookers gathered, James began to speak, and Caitlin listened. Over the next few minutes, as the city hummed with evening activity and the quiet murmur of onlookers grew, James shared his story. His voice was steady, but carried the weight of someone who lived through things most people couldn't imagine. He spoke of the young veterans he counseled, the kids barely out of high school who had returned from service carrying wounds, some visible, others buried deep. He told Caitlin about his weekly visits to the VA, where he sat with these young men and women, offering them the kind of understanding only someone who had walked in their boots could provide. Billy Burgers had been more than just a place to grab a meal. It had been a part of his routine, a small piece of normalcy in a life spent carrying in the burdens of war. The familiar greetings from the staff, the warm atmosphere, and the comfort of knowing he had a place where he was always welcome, it all meant something to him. But that was gone now. The corporate takeover had erased more than just a few menu items. Gone were the photographs of local heroes on the walls, replaced by sterile corporate branding. The Tuesday Veterans Discount had been discontinued, and now he had been thrown out like an inconvenience simply because the new rules named his jacket as medals and his service inappropriate attire. Caitlin listened without interruption, her jaw tightened as James spoke, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. By the time he finished, Caitlin took a slow breath, glancing back toward the restaurant where the young manager Bradley stood awkwardly inside, pretending to be busy while stealing glances outside. She turned to James, her voice calm but firm. Come with me. James hesitated, looking down at the scattered contents of his wallet. He seemed uncertain, embarrassed. Even Caitlin extended a hand, a steady offer of support, but not forceful. This isn't over, she said, her eyes full of determination. With a nod, James gathered his belongings, and together they stepped back into Billy's Burgers. The restaurant fell silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates, and even the kitchen's usual clatter seemed to hush. The staff, who had been so eager to enforce their policies just moments ago, now stood frozen. Broadly, the young manager swallowed hard as Caitlin approached. Caitlin's reputation wasn't just about basketball. She had built a name for herself as someone who stood up for what was right, and right now she was staring down a man who had failed spectacularly at that. Mr. O'Neill, Bradley began, his voice unsure. You can start, Caitlin cut in her tone, leaving no room for argument by explaining why you think it's acceptable to treat any customer this way, let alone a veteran who's been supporting this business for years. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Bradley's tablet slipped slightly in a sweaty grasp. Ma'am, we have policies about appropriate attire, he stammered, gesturing weakly toward a laminated corporate handbook behind the counter. Our guidelines are clear. Caitlin leaned forward slightly. Let me tell you something about policies, she said, her voice low but carrying through the entire restaurant. I know how businesses work. I know what it means to have rules in place, but I also know the difference between enforcing a policy and humiliating a man who has given more to this country than you could ever understand. Bradley's face paled. Caitlin pointed toward James's jacket, her eyes never leaving the young manager's. Do you know what that Purple Heart means? She asked. Bradley hesitated. It's a military award. It means, Caitlin interrupted, that this man shed blood for his country. That Bronze Star, she pointed to the next medal. It means he risked his life too. Save others, those aren't just decorations, Bradley. They are proof of sacrifice, vice proof of courage. And then you threw him out because a piece of corporate paper told you to. The restaurant was completely still. Through the windows, Caitlin noticed more people gathering outside. Some were veterans, their caps and jackets giving them away. Others were civilians, but all of them watched their expressions and mixture of disbelief and quiet anger. Caitlin pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contact 6. Know what she said, locking eyes with Bradley. I happen to know the CEO of fast food Continental. Should I give him a call? I'd love to hear his explanation for why his franchises are treating veterans this way. Bradley's breath hitched. Before he could form another excuse, a voice called out from behind the counter. Mr. Harrison, one of the younger employees, a waitress who had been silently watching, stepped forward. She held something in her hands. It was a stack of framed photographs. These used to be on the walls, she said. Quietly, before they took them down, she handed them to James. James's hands trembled as he flipped through the images. They were pictures of local veterans who had once been honored in this very restaurant, his own unit included. For the first time that night, James smiled. Caitlin turned back to Bradley. Here's what's going to happen. First, Mr. Harrison is going to sit down and enjoy his meal in the house. Then tomorrow you're going to review every policy that prioritizes corporate image over basic human decency. She folded her arms, her expression firm. And you're going to put those pictures back where they belong. The manager swallowed hard but noted. Caitlin turned to James. Shall we? The elderly veteran gave her a grateful nod, and with Caitlin by his side, took his usual seat, the one he had occupied every Tuesday for 15 years. As word spread, something incredible happened. Veterans from around the area began arriving. Some wore their old uniforms, others just their caps or jackets, but all of them came to support James. Within an hour, Billy's Burgers was filled with men and women who had served. Caitlin, watching it all unfold, felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She waved over a waitress to specials, she said, sliding her credit card onto the table. And I keep them coming for anyone wearing a veteran's cap or jacket tonight. The staff moved quickly, suddenly eager to make things right. By the end of the night, the restaurant had served more than 50 veterans. As Caitlin was getting ready to leave, James turned to her. Thank you, he said simply, not just for me, but for all of us who sometimes feel invisible. Caitlin clasped his hand firmly. No, she said, thank you for your service, for your sacrifice, and for reminding everyone that some things matter more than rules in a corporate handbook. She paused, glancing back at Bradley, who is now personally helping put the veteran photos back on the wall. Same time next Tuesday, she asked. James straightened his shoulders. Wouldn't miss. It would happen to Billy's Burgers. That night wasn't just about one veteran or one restaurant. It was about respect. It was about a community coming together to right a wrong. And it was about one athlete using her voice to remind everyone that the biggest wins in life happen far from the court.